ఇంటర్మీడియట్ విద్యారంగంలో అగ్రగామి మన NSR ఇంపల్స్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ ఇన్స్టిట్యూషన్. ఐఐటి జేఈఈ అయినా నీట్ అయినా తిరుగులేని విద్యా సంస్థ NSR ఇంపల్స్.
Good morning students, let us have that living thing class. Now we were in the discussion about the living world. In the living world we try to discuss the definition for the living organism. Just started with the parameters such as growth. Now we are in the discussion about the growth. So if you look at the growth phenomena, we discussed that abiotic components, right, also called as, we refer them as a non-living components, and other one is we are speaking about a biotic components, also called as what, a living components. So we were in the discussion about that growth phenomena. We were in the discussion about growth, abiotic and biotic we have taken, and we studied abiotic occurs by external growth, that is by the accumulation of materials, that means according to this we say that non-living things also exhibit the phenomena called as growth. Now coming to living organisms, in living organisms we say the growth is internal, it's internal growth, meaning it occurs internally within the living organisms. Now according to the internal growth, the living organisms in generally they divide into two categories. What are they? Unicellular organisms, and other category is multicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. When we take the unicellular organisms, here for example we take prokaryotes. Prokaryotes means first formed organisms are called prokaryotes. They contain only single cell. Single cell, here generally for example if you take bacteria divides by fission. Bacteria divides by binary fission. What is the meaning of binary fission here? This is bacteria. So this is nothing but what we find here. This is what is called bacteria. Now bacteria has its own what you call DNA. DNA undergo replication, forms one more copy. Then exactly division occurs in the center. As a result of division in the center, it forms two daughter cells having one DNA, one daughter cell having one DNA, other daughter cell having other DNA. So here how many daughter cells are produced? There is a formation of two daughter cells, right? So here one bacteria divides into two daughter cells with the replication of DNA. How replication of DNA occurs? We are going to study in the coming classes. DNA undergoes the process called as DNA replication. What's the meaning of DNA replication? All of you know DNA is the genetic material. DNA, one copy of DNA, it undergoes duplication, means multiplies. One copy of DNA, it becomes two copies. It replicates the same DNA as it is, it copies and forms its own daughter DNA. So its own copy it forms, that's why it's called replication. It multiplies. One DNA becomes two DNAs. So this is called DNA replication. After DNA replication, one bacteria, one parental cell, one mother cell divides by binary fission, and the two daughter cells are exactly identical. These two daughter cells are identical to mother cell or parental cell. What is the meaning? The two daughter cells which are produced here, exactly they look like the mother DNA, mother bacteria. The two daughter cells which are produced here identical to their parental cell or mother cell. That is why these two daughter cells are also called as, they are referred as clones. I write here, they are also called clones, or I write here very clearly, clones. When do we apply the terminology clones? Whenever the two daughter cells which are produced here, if they are similar to their mother cell, similar to their parental cell, then the two daughter cells are said to be clones. They are exactly Xerox copies of their parental cell. These two daughter cells are identical to mother cell and divides, one becomes two. That is why it is called a binary fission. Generally in unicellular organisms, what is happening? One cell divides and form two cells. That means here, what is happening here? Here there is increase in number of cells. There is increase in number of cells. That means in unicellular organisms, growth is defined in terms of increasing number of cells. As number of cells are keep increasing, 1 becomes 2, after some time 2 becomes 4, then 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16, like that there is a continuous increase in number of cells. Itself is defined as growth in unicellular organisms. Coming to multicellular organisms. Multicellular organisms, for our understanding, we again divide them into two categories. We call them as plants. Other one is animals, right. So, when we take the plants here, you know that in case of plants, G means growth, growth is indeterminate, growth is indeterminate, meaning undefined. It keeps growing throughout the lifespan of the plant. Indeterminate, or we can say it is unlimited. Why it is unlimited? Because of apical meristem and axillary or lateral meristems. In case of plants, G is growth. Growth is indeterminate, unlimited. Why? Because it is unlimited, because of apical and axillary meristem. What are they? If you take, this is a plant, this is called as apical meristem. This is called as apical meristem. Apical meristem cells divide and produces new cells. As a result, growth occurs. So, this is what we call, this is growth. Growth occurs at the tip of the plant. A tip contains a tissue or the cells called meristematic cells. These meristematic cells undergo the process called cell division. They are present at the tip, that is why they are called apical meristem. Growth occurs at the tip, that is apical meristem. Sometimes axillary bud is there, even that grows, that causes lateral growth, that involves formation of the branches. So, that the tissue which is growing here, it is called lateral meristem, or itself is called axillary meristem. So, you have both apical meristem as well as axillary meristem. So, in case of plants, the growth is indeterminate. It keeps growing throughout the lifespan. It is indeterminate. Coming to animals, then what do we say? In case of animals, the growth is, G means growth, growth is, it is determinate, or we say it is limited. The growth is determinate, or we say that is limited. Limited means what here? Growth happens only up to certain age. Animals, they will not grow throughout their lifespan, whereas plants, some of the plants, if you take tall plants like eucalyptus and sequoias, empire vines, there are some plants, they are called huge tall plants. They keeps growing throughout their lifespan. The growth will not stop in the middle. They keeps grow throughout their lifespan. So eucalyptus, it is one of the tallest tree having 119 meters. You will get it in second year. It is also one of the tallest tree, right. So in most of the plants the growth is indeterminate or unlimited, meaning it happens throughout the lifespan, whereas coming to in case of animals the growth is determinate and limited. Limited meaning it occurs only up to certain age. Growth occurs only up to certain age, and after this age what happens, growth will stop. After certain period the growth will stop, right. So here growth stops after certain period, after certain age. So you can know that very well, animals will be keep growing. After certain age they will stop the growth, right. So beyond that, genetically it is determined, animal cannot go beyond the height, it is fixed by genes. So it is called genetic growth. Animals grow only up to certain age, after that the growth cannot occur, growth stops up to certain age, that is why it is called determinate or itself is called limited, right. Now see, let us here if you look at, now we say abiotic and biotic. Now in generally when you look at, we say growth is, I will ask you a question, whether growth is measurable or unmeasurable. Can we measure the growth or we cannot measure the growth? So if I ask this question, so most of you can say that yes, it is measurable. Why? Because in front of us the plant is an younger plant, and after certain duration, after 6 months, 1 year, you can see the growth of the plant is taking place and that is visible, right. So here we can say yes, growth is measurable. When you take the growth is measurable, I will give you a small example. Maybe guys, all life science students, all biology students, I may tell you that okay, the young baby is born, young infant or young baby. Go and sit beside the young baby, the young newly born baby. Maybe you just carry your lens and all that, and I will tell you to measure the growth. So can you measure the growth in young infant baby or in newly born baby? Do you think it is possible? Maybe you are sitting in front of the 6 months old baby or 8 months old baby. Maybe you are sitting in front of the baby for all 24 hours holding a lens in your hand, and you are trying to see that where growth is taking place. So is it possible to see and measure the growth in young infant or young newly born baby? Is it possible? Do you think that okay, you are holding the lens, overnight suddenly there is a sudden increase in growth of the leg, or after 1 week there was sudden increase in growth of the hand or the stomach? You could able to notice that with the lens. Is it so? That is possible. So can you measure it and tell me yes, within 1 week the hand is raised, with after a month leg is raised? Can you measure that? No. Right. Is it possible? Definitely no. Even if you sit in front of the young infant or newly born baby, even throughout the year if you hold the lens in your hand and holding in your hand and trying to measure the growth in a young newly born baby, it is difficult to measure. Why? Because the growth is intrinsic process. What is the meaning of intrinsic process? Meaning it is internal process. Especially if you talk the growth of the human beings. In case of human beings, the growth is internal process, intrinsic process. And why don't you, okay, you can see young plant is growing in front of you. Maybe after 1 year you measure today with the scale, okay, this is 3 centimeters or 3 meters height. Maybe after 2 years if you measure, the plant growth goes to up to 5 meters, fine. The young newly born baby growth also, if you see today up to certain weight or up to certain height, maybe after 2 years you can see definitely there is an increase in size and weight of the living organism. Then, but why can't you see the growth, what is taking place? Because definitely we know the organism is growing. Maybe the young plant or maybe the young baby, we know that growth is taking place. but we cannot see that growth process. We know that growth is happening, but we cannot see the growth process. Why? Because the growth is intrinsic process, it is internal process. And when even though it is internal, finally we can see, oh, the kid has grown up to certain age, fine, okay, we say, but that growth it is invisible to us because it is a slow process. It is a slow process. So, most wonderful thing in our nature, if you take, the most wonderful thing is, even the baby is in front of the mother for all 24 hours. Even mother don't know that, yeah, mother knows baby is growing, but mother also cannot detect the growth or the changes what's happening in the baby until unless after 1 year, okay, 2 years baby if you take, suddenly overnight the second year ends and third year begins after her birthday, suddenly there overnight the growth will not occur. Right, most wonderful thing in our nature is the baby is in front of the mother for all 24 hours, but mother also don't know that baby is how the growth is taking place in baby, how the baby is growing. Mother also don't know how baby is growing. She knows that yes, baby is growing, but how means mother also cannot answer. Even mother sees the baby or holds the baby even though for all 24 hours across the months together, years together. Then when mother will come to know that growth has taken place in the baby, okay, after 5 years features has got changed, okay, the old clothes will not fit for the baby, then she will understand, oh, my baby, yeah, she has grown or he has grown, baby is grown. Yes or no? So here, because there is an increase in size and body mass, right, then she will understand, oh yeah, baby is grown, because old clothes are not fitting for the baby. So mother will think, yeah, I have to buy new clothes. Then she will understand, yeah, baby has grown, but how baby has grown means it cannot be answered by mother also. That's the most wonderful thing nature has, that even though baby is in front of the mother, mother cannot detect the growth phenomena of the baby. Why? Because it is intrinsic process, it happens internally, and moreover it is a very slow process. Okay, so when we say the growth phenomena in this case, we say growth is measurable, but it is intrinsic process, internal process, and moreover it is a slow process. Right. So, after you see the complete overall structure of the growth here, now can we can say that, can we consider the growth as a defining property, meaning can we use the growth as a character to define a living organism? Is it possible to define the growth as one of the character for the defining a living organism? Yes, definitely no. Why? Because living organisms also growing, along with that we say non-living organisms also exhibit the growth phenomena because they show what is called external growth. So, if the parameter or the character is purely for living organism, when you say that okay, only living organisms are growing, non-living organisms are not at all growing, then that is a unique property to define a living organism. Yes, we can use growth for defining as a defining property. But here it is exhibited by non-living components also, meaning non-living components also exhibit the growth phenomena, whatever it may be internal or external, that is secondary. So, non-living things also exhibiting the growth phenomena. Growth we cannot take as a defining property, it is a non-defining property, meaning it cannot be used, this character of growth cannot be used for defining a living organisms. Why? Because non-living organisms also exhibit growth, that may be by externally, that is accumulation of materials on the surface. So, what is the final conclusion with the parameter called growth here? We say growth is considered as, what we can say, a growth is considered as a non-defining property. So, we say growth is a non-defining property. What is the meaning of a non-defining property? What is the meaning of non-defining property here? It is not used to define living organism. This character it is not used, this character cannot be used for defining a living organism. Why? Because non-living organisms also exhibit the growth phenomena with the accumulation of materials, and that will come under external growth, right. So, yeah, so let us quickly revise the growth phenomena. So, here of course we studied that growth can be defined it as, it may be in terms of increase in size, or we say increase in volume or height, mass, density. So, we can use any parameter in defining the growth phenomena, right. So, growth if you take, it happens in abiotic components, also called non-living components. Let us quickly revise, it happens even in biotic or living components. Now, when you take the abiotic components, here what occurs is nothing but external growth. Why? Because growth occurs externally with the accumulation of materials on the surface. So, we discussed for the last class, here mountains, sand dunes all will come. Then coming to abiotic living components, here they exhibit what is called internal growth. Now, when you look at internal growth here, it happens in both unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms are nothing but single celled organisms, only one cell they have. With one cell only they perform all metabolic activities. So, they are nothing but prokaryotes. First formed unicellular organisms are called prokaryotes. We are going to discuss prokaryotes later. What is the best example to study and understand here is nothing but bacteria. When you take bacteria, you take one bacteria, if you look at how it is undergoing growth. So, here it divides by the phenomena called as binary fission. What is binary fission? One cell in which DNA undergoes DNA replication, meaning what? One DNA, it copies itself and form the another copy. One becomes two, doubling, replication, multiplication. One DNA will become two DNAs. Then the cell divides exactly in the center. As a result, you can see formation of how many daughter cells? Two daughter cells, and these two daughter cells are exactly identical to their mother cell. They exactly look similar to that of their parental cell. When they look exactly similar, what do you call them? Remember the terminology, clones. Clones not only applicable for bacteria guys, in the first year syllabus, in the second year syllabus, wherever you get the daughter cells, if they look exactly similar, we call them as clones. Okay, try to remember. Then why do you call this binary fission? Because one is becoming two cells, that is why it is called binary fission. Remember guys, the same concept we will discuss once again in our next parameter called reproduction. At that time once again we discuss. Why? Because one dividing and producing two daughter cells means it also will come under reproduction. So, in unicellular organisms like bacteria, growth is synonymous to reproduction. Statement is very important. What is that? A growth is synonymous to reproduction. We will come back to that part at the time of reproduction once again. We need to discuss the same story because growth and reproduction both are same in case of unicellular organisms, for example bacteria. Then coming to multicellular organisms, we take plants in which the growth, G is nothing but growth. Growth is indeterminate and unlimited, meaning it happens throughout the lifespan in most of the plants where growth keeps growing in apical, meristem and all that. So, here apical and axillary meristem we can take as an examples because growth occurs at the tip as well as on the lateral bud, right. Now, coming to the animals, the growth is said to be determinate. Here it is indeterminate or undeterminate and unlimited. Coming to animals, the growth is determinate or limited, means growth occurs only up to certain age. Genetically that is being decided by the genes and the organism grows up to certain age. After that growth stops permanently. So, this is determinate, limited in case of animals. In case of plants it is indeterminate or unlimited. Then coming to growth, definitely growth is measurable, we can see, but how growth is happening inside the organism, that is invisible. Why? Because it is intrinsic process, as I said it is internal process and it is very slow process, right. Now, let us continue with the next parameter, metabolism. Now let us continue with the next parameter, that is metabolism. So what is the conclusion for the growth phenomena? We say that growth is a non-defining property. What's the meaning of that? It cannot be used to define the living organism. Let us go with the next characteristic. What we have is nothing but metabolism. What is metabolism? How can we define this? This is nothing but a sum total of all the processes which occur within the living organism. Within the living organism. What's the meaning of this? So here if you take in this case, what we can understand here is sum total of all the processes, meaning all the processes which happens within the living organism will come under metabolic processes. What are metabolic processes? You know, respiration, digestion, locomotion, meaning what is locomotion? Moving from one place to other place, locomotion, respiration, right. So all the processes, whatever they take place within the living organism itself, they come under metabolism, meaning they are metabolic activities, metabolic processes. Right. So when you take the metabolism, now altogether we have different metabolic processes like locomotion, as I told you, digestion, respiration and all that. But in generally we divide metabolism into mainly two types. Metabolism mainly into two types. What are they? So we can take, one is called anabolism and other one is called as catabolism. Right. So we have altogether two. What are they? Anabolism as well as catabolism. Anabolism, if you take, how do we define anabolism? So here simple molecules, or we take a smaller molecules aggregate, meaning they combine to form a larger molecule, a large complex molecule. So this is what we call it as anabolism. What is the definition of this? So before I explain this definition, let me give you, so for this example, the best process or the process which occurs in plants, we all know, that is photosynthesis. Okay. So we see now what happens here in anabolism. Simple or smaller molecules aggregate or combine to form a large complex molecule. What's the meaning of this? When you look at here, we say that smaller molecules will join, they aggregate, they come close, they join together, they combine together, and when all smaller molecules they combine together, they join together, that lead to formation of a bigger molecule. All will join and form the big molecule. So this is nothing but small molecules or smaller components join to form a big component. So that's what is called anabolism. That's why anabolism is also called as a constructive process. Itself is also called as a constructive process, meaning what? We are constructing a bigger molecules using a smaller molecules. We are designing, we are forming the structure, we are constructing the bigger molecule by the use of smaller molecules. So anabolism itself is also called as a constructive process. Itself is called constructive process. Now, why do we have taken photosynthesis as anabolic process? Try to remember, very important. Photosynthesis will fall in the category called anabolism, not in catabolism. Why? Just try to recollect about photosynthesis, what you studied in lower classes. You know, 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 12 molecules of water. Now, here we take sunlight, and this happens in green parts of the plant, that is green parts means what is present? Chlorophyll. As a result, what is there? There is a food. Photosynthesis, all of you have to remember importantly, this is a anabolic process, constructive process. Why? Because it takes carbon dioxide from atmosphere, plant takes water from the soil, and along with this sunlight is essential. Carbon dioxide, water are nothing but smaller molecules, they join together and form the bigger molecule, that is nothing but glucose. Now, sometimes it leads to formation of starch, sucrose, along with the release of oxygen. So, we say photosynthesis is a anabolic process. Coming to catabolism, catabolism itself is also called as a destructive process. Okay. So, what do we say? Catabolism itself is also called as a destructive process. Why do you call so? This is quite opposite to that, but in this case here a bigger molecule, what you find, it is being broken down, a big molecule or a bigger molecule or a component, a bigger component here in this case broken down to form smaller molecules. It breaks and forms a smaller molecules. Quite reverse of the process called as anabolism. Okay, catabolism is nothing but quite reverse of anabolism. In this case, what happens? A bigger component, it breaks down, it will get broken down and to form what is called a smaller molecules. So, here this is what is called catabolism, itself is called as a destructive process. That means what happens here, you can say that formation of simple molecules from large complex molecule itself is called as catabolism. How do you define this? You can say formation of simple molecules from the large complex molecules, it is called catabolism. That means simple molecules are produced by breakdown of a large complex molecule. This is called catabolism, itself is called as a destructive process. Now, here we took photosynthesis. For the catabolism, we can take the example as respiration. What is the pathway? We have to remember respiration. What happens in the respiration? You know, here oxidation of food takes place. In case of plants, the food produced here, it is called glucose, or it may be sucrose, or it may be starch. It is get broken down. As a result, it produces oxygen and water, right. So, this is what is nothing but glucose. Glucose is a bigger molecule, it will get broken down, oxidation of the food takes place. When it get broken down here, it lead to formation of oxygen and water. This process comes under respiration. Bigger molecule broken down to produce smaller molecules. So, all metabolic processes, most of the metabolic processes, either they happen in this way or they happen in that way. But you know it very well in respiration here, this process, if you look at, respiration produces energy. If you observe one important difference in these cases, you know when we take the food is get broken down to release the energy. Respiration is needed for the breakdown of food into energy. So, energy is released out. Coming to photosynthesis, in this case energy is needed for the combining of these two to produce a bigger molecule, energy is needed. So, approximately 686 kilocalories of energy is used in the process of photosynthesis. So, what do you call this? This is called as endothermic reaction or endorganic reaction. Endothermic means energy is released out in the form of heat or it takes energy. Which energy takes? Light energy. Okay, it takes light energy, converts into chemical energy. As it utilizes the energy into the process, that's why it's said to be as what? Endothermic, endothermic, meaning it takes the energy. For this process to operate, it needs the energy. Coming to respiration, I think you know in chemistry you will be studying exothermic, exorganic, endothermic reactions, right. So here coming to respiration, in this case it is referred as exothermic or exorganic, meaning it releases energy. Most of the times thermo meaning energy, it may be released in the form of heat energy, so or sometimes in the form of chemical energy. So whenever in the process if the energy is released out, then what do we call that? We call this as exothermic. If the energy is released out, we call exothermic. If the energy is taken or utilized in the reaction, it is called as endothermic, right. So we have endothermic reaction, exothermic reaction. Now, so in generally if you come back to the living organism, what did you say? Everything, respiration, digestion, movement, everything comes under metabolism. Now after you, generally we divide the processes into anabolism and catabolism, that's fine to hear, right. Now then tell me, can we consider metabolism is a defining property or a non-defining property? So you can think about it, right. So metabolism is taking place in living organisms, no doubt. So tell me, it is a defining or a non-defining? What's the meaning of that? Can we use metabolism in defining a living organism, or we should not use this metabolism in defining the living organism? So what do you say? So definitely metabolism is a very important criteria to tell that it is a living organism. Why? Living organism is keep moving here and there. Seeing that non-living thing, it cannot move. Right, non-living things cannot exhibit locomotion. What is locomotion? Movement. Non-living component, they will not move, but living organism, it can move from one place to other place. Seeing that, yeah, it is moving, that's why it's called living organism. A table is not moving, so that's why we call it is a non-living. That means a living organism purely we can define definitely using all metabolic processes. Meaning all metabolic processes happens in the living organism, does not take place in non-living components. So what is the final conclusion? Metabolism is referred as a defining property of living organisms. Defining property of a living organism, meaning what? Yes, we can use metabolism in defining the living organisms. I hope you got it, guys. Let me quickly revise it. Remember, we discussed two parameters, growth and metabolism. Growth is non-defining. Guys, last point is very, very important. Growth is non-defining, and in this last point is very important. Metabolism is defining. Okay, these two parameters, final conclusions you need to remember very, very importantly. Let me have quick revision. Metabolism is nothing but sum total of all the processes which occur within the living organism. We divide them into two categories. Anabolism itself is called constructive process. Catabolism itself is called destructive process. Why do you call this as constructive process? Why? Because a smaller molecule join together, aggregate together, combine together to form a large complex molecule. You can see in the diagram, right. So what is the example? Photosynthesis. In this, carbon dioxide is a smaller molecule, water is a smaller molecule, join together and form the glucose. In this, energy is taken. So this is endothermic. Coming to catabolism itself is called destructive. Why do you call destructive? A bigger molecule is destroyed. It broken down into smaller molecules. That means formation of simple molecules from the large complex molecules. What is the example? Respiration. So respiration is considered as exothermic, meaning energy is released out. That means glucose get broken down and oxygen, water, along with that some amount of energy will be released out. So this is exothermic, right. So we completed two parameters, growth and metabolism.
ఇంటర్మీడియట్ విద్యారంగంలో అగ్రగామి మన ఎన్ఎస్ఆర్ ఇంపల్స్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ ఇన్స్టిట్యూషన్. ఐఐటి జేఈఈ అయినా నీట్ అయినా తిరుగులేని విద్యా సంస్థ ఎన్ఎస్ఆర్ ఇంపల్స్.